Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to our panel on Matriarch-Centered Design. Before we get into any content, we would like to invite you to share with us in what we call a moment to arrive. I don't know if you all are feeling it too, and this is my first South by Southwest. This is a lot, guys. and the FOMO is real. And so we'd like to invite you, if you're comfortable, to either close your eyes or just, and we're just gonna take 3 deep centering breaths together. So if you're comfortable with closing your eyes or unfocusing your gaze, I invite you now to kind of roll your shoulders back and down, take a nice deep belly breath in, and then exhale, just let everything go. We're gonna do that again. Inhale, breath in. Exhale, let it go. And before this last breath, I invite you to consider the intention as you exhale on this last breath. I'm exactly where I need to be. Inhale for your last breath. And exhale, let it out. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a lot, especially for those of us that are anxious or neurodivergent or are just trying to process everything that's coming at us. So thank you for that moment. Again, my name is Michelle Reisner, and I welcome you on behalf of our panel to Matriarch-Centered Design. We are using a slightly different format today. I am not the moderator. I am simply doing the welcome today. And we're going to let the following how might we question guide our next hour. How might we take inspiration from matriarchal cultures, role models in nature, and the newest scientific research as we grow as designers, leaders, and people? That will be our how might we question for the next hour. And for that next hour, we're going to draw inspiration for our how might we question from matriarchal societies, inspiration from nature, inspiration from species. We're going to look at cyclical time and rest, and then we're going to start to converge around how to bring matriarchal values into our workplaces. And then we'll conclude the session not so much with a Q&A, but more an opportunity for reflection, insights, conversation, and of course questions if you have them. So that will be our journey for the next hour. Now, we would like to know a little bit more about who's in the room before we tell you a bit more about ourselves. So Cate, can you help us with that?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. If you want to hop to the next slide. Hi everyone, my name is Cate Johnson. You'll find out a little bit about me in a minute, but we're all designers here on stage, and there's probably a bunch of designers in the room. And if you are, you might also agree that good design starts with learning about the community that you're in, the people that you are with, before you as a designer assert who you are. So I want to invite you to physically stand up if you're able. Maybe you put a hand up, maybe it's with your heart that you stand up. Join me in standing, and stay standing if you identify as a matriarch. Amazing. Stay standing, matriarchs. Next, if you identify as a woman leader, please join me and stand. Wow. All right. Any designers that are not standing, please join us and please stand. And finally, any humans that are not yet standing, please join us. Amazing. So we might have a couple AI bots or robots, but the intention here is you all belong in this session. Every person here is part of Matriarch-Centered Design, and we're going to tell you a little bit about what we mean by that. If you hop to the next slide.
Sorry, this conversation and this topic came about through the friendships on this stage, right? This is what we're texting about, this is what we're chatting about, this is what we're trying to learn more about and grow. And And often you teach or you talk about what you want to learn, right? It's a really powerful way to do that. So we'll just share across friends each other and as we introduce each other too. And we're sharing our stories in no way to humble brag, but to say, hey, these are connection points that we've had in our lives that might connect with some of your past lives or current lives. And also these are things that shaped us and shaped why we're here today. Some of our past histories and achievements and just journeys along the way too. And you'll also see, as we introduce ourselves, we're gonna show pictures of ourselves as babies, or in some cases middle school pictures, just to remember that to all have some levity about where we have been and then also where we're headed, right? We are all prototypes. We're iterating on ourselves every day, and that's, I know, a huge reason why you're here to grow and stretch. So I'll start it off. I think Sarah,
So what we wanted to do was to introduce ourselves through our friendships. So it is my deep pleasure to introduce my friend Saraounia and Mboka, who I have known for about 8 years now. And it is so fitting that she is named after Saraounia, the warrior queen, or Viola Davis recently played that role, if y'all are familiar. So she is named after Saraounia, and my goodness, does she represent that energy. She came to our international NGO when I was the director of innovation, and she was an intern, and she was just blowing shit up. Why are we doing things like this? This system doesn't make sense. Who does this serve? And she hates that. Well, we've always done it that way, and I just get a contact high when we are around each other. So now, these many years later, Saraounia refers to herself as an inclusion engineer rather than a DEI expert. She also calls herself an organizational system strengthening advisor, and she uses agile methodologies to transform organizations and make them more empowering. She has over 15 years of experience in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, and she is a recognized leader in the LGBTQI+ space for communities and women-led NGOs, which we are over at Rising Solutions, and she is a true and valued friend.
No need to clap. Most of what she said is a lie. But thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. And in turn, everyone, happy Monday, happy spring. So happy that winter is finally over for most of us. If you're in the Midwest or the West Coast, sorry. I would like to introduce my friend, Michelle. And as Michelle mentioned, we've known each other for a while. And many of our great conversations happened in the space where most great conversations between women happen, over the bathroom sink while washing your hands. As an intern, Michelle was not only a senior person in my organization, she wasn't only my ally, but she was my accomplice. She was my lookout, my getaway driver, the person to hold the bag when people said, "You're too young, you're too much of an activist, don't worry, you'll grow out of it." And so, Michelle started her career in humanitarian aid, working in Iraq and Afghanistan, embodying the very principles and values that we're going to be talking about today, looking at empathy, collaboration. She is the founder and lead consultant at Rising Solutions, which is a social impact strategy firm as well as an incubation firm. She's worked with clients such as the International Rescue Committee, the Rainforest Alliance, the United Nations. She's an innovation strategist, she's a design thinker, a public speaker, but more than all of that, she's a person. She's my friend.
I'd love for y'all to meet Cate. And she, you see people's bios, but you know the behind the scenes. That's what's so fun, to see the growth that's happened over all these years and to see your prototype. Cate grew up in a one traffic light town, and now she has journeyed into Boulder, Colorado, where she lives with her 5-year-old rescue pup, Luna, who has been on many of our prep calls for this. And along the way, she's had an amazing journey. World Wildlife Federation, and then she went and got her MBA, and while she was there, she worked in a startup in Ghana, and then came back, and you've just been on, teaching and spreading human-centered design through workshops with NASA and NFL, and is also a teacher at IDEO University, or IDOU, and now has brought her talents to creating Arbor Revolutions, which is a way for herself and other leaders to connect and align with nature and learn and grow from nature. And right now she's also working at Cross Country Consulting, which is where she's building out an emerging human-centered design practice to help businesses transform and reach their goals. So Cate is a joy to be your friend and on this journey with you.
Thanks, Natalie. And our fourth and final panelist, my sweet friend, Natalie Foley, who has the best bandana of all of us on stage, note to being here in Texas. Natalie grew up as part of a large Cajun family in South Louisiana. And while I say I moved to the South when I moved to DC, she says she moved to the North when she moved to that area. She has also done a lot of human-centered design around the world. She started her career working with USAID in Kabul. She studied abroad in Ghana, so we have that in common. And she then went and kind of shifted her career to be more matriarchal in a lot of ways, and ended up being part of the leadership running an innovation and venture studio in DC called Pure Insight. And she's currently at Opportunity at Work, which is a startup social enterprise focused on stars, folks who are skilled through alternative routes, which is very in line with our matriarchal values we're about to talk about. Natalie is also the mom to 2 Lakota kids and lives in the DC area still with her family. And she's got the best outfits. I always want to steal her clothes. Please help me welcome Natalie.
Okay, so you've met all of us, which is phenomenal. Thank you for being in community with us. And Saraounia is going to kick us off and kind of set us up for success.
All right, everyone, let me stand up for this. So, in order for us to move forward today, it's important for us to create what I refer to as good soil. Each and every individual in this room is a plant, in this metaphor. Just go with me. So really the idea of how can we create the conditions where every plant in an ecosystem in that soil is able to thrive and grow as intended. Maybe they're fruiting, maybe some are making flowers. And so in order to create the good soil for this presentation, we'd like to just share a couple of, not boundaries, but parameters that allow us all to be able to fully engage in today's discussion. And so, if you have your phone not on silent, could you make it a little more quiet? No need to turn it off, no need to, I'm not your parent, I'm also just turning 31, so I'm probably not old enough to tell you to do all that stuff. But if you could put it on mute, that would be awesome. We're gonna be talking about some things that for some people may be difficult. As Michelle had mentioned, I'm a little bit of a contrarian rabble-rouser, and so we're going to be talking about things that may be new, may be difficult, may cause us to reflect and challenge our own thoughts and perceptions. And so I ask that we all assume positive intent. This is not a session to be like, this group of people are better than another group of people. This is about us all coming together. And then finally, I would like to get a commitment from you all, and if you agree, kindly raise your hand. I would like this space to be one of soul. That means that we're sensitive, we're open, we understand, and most importantly, we listen. And that's not for us as the panelists, but it's for you all. So if I have that commitment that I get your soul, maybe that sounded kind of weird, but if you agree with this, can I see a hand? Awesome, thanks everyone.
All right. So one final thing before we dive into content. You'll notice, again, we're doing things that maybe a little differently in this session. So before we start talking about examples of matriarchy in different cultures and in nature and what it is and all these things, we thought we might start with a definition. Which feels like a kind way to begin. So matriarchy, in our definition of matriarchy, is a system led by women. But almost more importantly, matriarchy operates with these core values: equality, inclusivity, and collaboration, co-creation, and nurturing ourselves and all those around us. So you'll see how these come alive in a lot of different ways, but I want to start kind of like how we started our panel, Saraounia, and let's start with people. As designers, this is usually where we start. I'm curious if you could walk us through, what is it like to be a person in matriarchy?
Sure. I'm the people in person, so let's talk about people. Thank you. This goes awesome. I'm probably gonna forget this. But folks, as we start today, really wanting to center on people, on human beings, on societies, and how that affects, and how matriarch-centered principles affect society and how we design it. And so it's really a conversation around how matriarchal values, as Cate had mentioned, can help us revolutionize design, creating to products, services, spaces, and systems that are more inclusive, more representative, more collaborative. And in order to do that, I'd like to share a conversation with you all that I've been having with my brother. I am one of three, I am the only girl, and I am the middle child. And so oftentimes when I have conversations or thoughts around men, I go to my brothers. And when I told my younger brother I was doing this panel, his first question was, matriarchy, is that like feminism? What's the difference? And if this is about women, what do men have to do with it? And so I thought to myself, that's a pretty good question, because I don't actually know the difference. And so to that end, matriarchy in design is really about community, building systems that are inclusive, that are focused on sustainability. It really prioritizes design that center around communal well-being and environmental stewardship. We see this in examples in countries such as Iceland, such as Palau, such as Rwanda, even here within the United States if we look at indigenous practices. It encourages really that idea of it's about all of us and not just one group. Feminism in design is a little bit different in the sense that feminist-centered systems in design really look at perhaps challenging the current power dynamics and focusing on gender equality. Adding women's and women-identified individual voices to spaces where they've been missing, and places that perhaps they've been intentionally excluded. And so in recent years, I guess the last 20, 25 years, feminism in design has really expanded to be more representative, to include more diverse and intersectional perspectives such as Afrofeminism or indigenous feminist practices to ensure, again, that those systems, those products, those services are fit for function, they're fit for people. And so now that we have a little bit of that place setting in terms of feminism in design, matriarchy in design, to answer my brother's question, what do men have to do with it? And that's where I want to introduce the idea of patriarch-centered systems. And that is a system that most of us in the world live in. This is not to be like patriarchy is awful, feminism is better, but simply that's the fact. Most of us live in male-dominated or male-focused systems. And so these patriarchal systems tend to prioritize things such as hierarchy, dominance, extraction, exploitation, being number one, being the only one. And they tend to miss the needs of a larger number of people. They often tend to focus on one kind of person, or maybe two kinds of people that often intersect at the intersection of sex or your sex or your class. So if you are a wealthy man, everything applies to you. If you're a poor man, not everything, but some things. And so versus matriarch-centered design, which really again thinks about how can we be inclusive? How can we be empathetic? How are we able to design spaces that every individual, regardless of their gender, sex, race, class, ethnicity, has value? It's really about designing spaces that are sustainable and that are able to sustain people. Through matriarchal values, we're able to challenge the negative aspects of the status quo. How can we change the things, as Michelle had mentioned, the things in the system that don't work? And it's always been like that, isn't good enough. So in this way, if we're able to adopt, manifest, work in matriarch-centered ways, we're really able to leverage design as a tool for social impact. Not only thinking about ourselves or our organizations, but thinking about the societies or the soil that each of us as individual plants find ourselves in. Awesome. And so I imagine that what I've just said has perhaps led to some people being like, awesome, no men, women are gonna take over the world. Maybe there are some people who are like, I'm an ally, but I don't know if I'm all here for you guys taking over the world and just men on, So this is not a conversation about saying that it's better when men are on top, or it's better when women are on top. We all know that dogs are better, Grow up, guys.
You went there.
Grow up.
Did anyone else catch that?
It's very clear that I have probably not slept with a man in many years because I did not laugh when I said it the first time. Back to professionalism. Thank you. So when I think about masculinity in design, or more specifically positive or healthy masculinity, it's really a masculinity that champions nurturing, empathy, respect, care, community. It often makes me think of my brothers. I probably won't tell them that. So whenever we get this recording, let's make sure to blur over that so that we can still keep our sibling relationship. But it makes me think about them and the ways that they intentionally try to move away from negative stereotypes that are often associated with masculinity, with possession, with dominance, with extraction, of beating your chest and being the only one, and trying to move towards a model of masculinity that is more centered around emotional intelligence, that really focuses on collective or communal well-being, not just for you and yours, but for everyone that surrounds you. In matriarchal settings, masculinity finds its strength in community. It finds its strength in empathy, shared decision-making, versus, as I mentioned, traditional patriarchal models, which again tend to be a bit me-centered versus we-centered. Masculinity, when viewed through the lens of matriarch-centered design, becomes a force for love, for nurturing, for respect. And so when we think about the matriarchal values of empathy and collaboration, those really harmonize with concepts of positive masculinity. An example of this will be that oftentimes in patriarch-centered systems, men are viewed as the warrior or the conqueror. In matriarch-centered systems, men might be the peacemaker, they might be the mediator, they might be the defender of their community and their environment. They are everything under the spectrum. They are not just forced into that role of the stoic. You have to be hard, you cannot show your emotions. And so again, when we view masculinity through the lens of matriarch-centered design or matriarch-centered principles, it provides us with a blueprint for society, for that collective well-being. It fosters an environment where empathy, care, sustainability are what are really valued. Ultimately, this allows for a masculinity that is more interconnected, that is more emotionally expressive. And this isn't just about masculinity in the context of women, but it creates better and deeper relationships for men, between men. Being able to hug, being able to kiss your friend and not being like, no bro, no homo. No, you can have affection. That is a part of what it is to be a man. And of course, I see this as not a man, so if there are any men in the audience who totally disagree, please feel free to find me after the session. And so ultimately, by championing these values, just coming into the context, the frame of South by Southwest 2024, thinking about the future, by working in these ways, we're able to not only create a future for future generations to inherit, but for future iterations of ourselves to experience a world where masculinity is synonymous with positivity, with inclusion, with care, with realness. You are what you are whenever you are it. No one can take that away from you, regardless of what your gender expression is, your sexual orientation, or your sexuality.
Wait, Saraounia, real quick before we go, I have to say this. When I first learned about matriarchal design from a man, and I think even having had amazing female bosses at PricewaterhouseCoopers and IBM, where I started my career, tons of them. It wasn't until I joined Parent Site and the founders, Tim Ogilvy, and I'd never heard the term power with instead of power over. And he was like, I'm here to do a startup, and this is how we're gonna run. I am all in, right? And I can figure out how to operationalize this and turn these values into practices, but I just would have never thought that 3 of the men that I work with the most are the ones who have taught me matriarchal design. And it's just a beautiful thing.
Thanks for sharing that, Nat. I think that really drives down the point that we're all in this together. It's not men versus women or female-identifying folks versus male-identifying folks, non-binary folks. At the end of the day, we're human. And matriarch-centered systems don't focus in that top-down hierarchy of men replacing women or women replacing men, but it's a circle. It's a wheel that helps us move forward as humans. We're all in this together. And for me, matriarch-centered design is everywhere. And if you don't believe me, let's just look at the world. The country of Rwanda has a 60% female representation in parliament. This is not to say that Rwanda is perfect. It is by no means such. But it is a key example of how in a post-genocide conflict, the post-1994 genocide in Rwanda, that country was rebuilt using principles of care, of inclusivity, of truth, of reconciliation, in such a way that you have better laws in Rwanda around land tenure. Children are taught around sexual and gender-based violence and how to prevent it in schools. If we were to come a little bit closer to home, could you raise your hand if you've ever had a job or ever hired someone? Awesome, glad to hear that everybody's making money. Then you've probably heard of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. But did you know that the Equal Employment Opportunity Act came from the Civil Rights Act? And the Civil Rights Act came and was catalyzed by women such as Rosa Parks, who refused to operate in systems that were unequal, that were unequitable, that favored certain other people above others. And ultimately, that's what led to the idea of merit and equity and fairness in our workplaces. Going a layer even more individual. Anybody who has children, you've probably, or have been, everyone who's been a child in this room who's not an AI, you've probably seen building blocks. These were also invented by a woman in the 19th century, helping children learn. If anybody has ever had to throw something in the trash and not wanting to touch the trash can, the pedal trash can was invented by a woman with 12 children. It might have been kind of difficult if while opening the trash she dropped a couple of her kids. And so really, these examples are just small examples to show that how when women and women-identified folks' perspectives are brought into the design space, how we all benefit from it. Versus in more patriarchal spaces, it tends to be one person over the other. And so as I've had this conversation, these reflections with my brother, the one thing that we weren't able to get to was that idea of, did we as human beings come up with this? Are we the center of it? And we really couldn't answer that question. And so I'd love to hear from my fellow panelists what their thoughts are. And specifically, Cate, could you help me out?
Yeah, thanks, Saraounia. Thanks for taking us on a journey around the world. I am always someone who looks to outside of myself and to nature when I'm curious about something. So I want to talk a little bit about where matriarchy might come from and walk through 3 examples of matriarchy in nature. I do, before I begin, want to really anchor us in this quote, in this question. Are you a part of nature or are you apart from nature? I think a lot of times we forget that we are made of water and stardust, and each of us is just as much part of nature as the trees that we walk by. So we, a lot of times in design thinking or human-centered design, look to biomimicry, which can sometimes be used in an extractive way to glean insights or to pull resources to help our designs. But I want to turn that on its head with more of a nature-centered design approach, which looks at the world around us as millions of years of evolution and design cycles to get our species and every other species in the universe, every element and rock and sun, to where it is today. So let's walk into a forest to start. Forests are somewhere that I feel really at home. I grew up, like Natalie said, in a town with 1 traffic light, and I grew up in the middle of the forest. And there's been a lot of really incredible research about forests, and they've actually found that there are species that they call the mother trees, which are anchors in the forest. They're the oldest species. They house other species. They connect through mycelium networks to share resources and warn of predators across not just the trees but other beings. And there's this beautiful book called The Overstory where they say everything in the forest is the forest. Therefore, when you walk into the forest, you become a part of it. And so I look to forests as an example of the matriarchal value of inclusivity and equality or equity, that we're all part of this system. We're all breathing air and secreting different things and working together. Another example of matriarchy in nature is honeybees. You actually might have been to a couple installations about honeybees. There was a honeybee cocktail thing, there was tons of honeybee stuff. And I want to remind us that just because we call the queen bee the head of the hive, they don't actually work in terms of a monarchy. Honeybees, like matriarchy, are much more democratic in the way in which they work together, collaborate. They not only co-create their built environment, but they also help co-create their immune systems for the hive together outside of their bodies. Maybe our healthcare system could model a little bit more like that. And an example of what that can look like in the design world is something like MIT's D-Lab. Instead of having everyone come somewhere like Austin, Texas to talk about all of these solutions, what MIT's D-Lab does is they go into community with a diverse set of folks, and they spend weeks learning together with communities what the design practice might look like, and they leave co-creating prototypes with communities. And so it's a great example of what this type of mindset and matriarchy can look like in design. And then finally, I want to talk about elephants. I was lucky, Natalie and I were lucky to spend time in northern Ghana, and that's me there with a very sweet elephant there. Matriarchs and elephants really exemplify the idea of moving at the speed of trust and gaining leadership over time through relationships and nurturing those around us. And I see this in the design world, in my role as part of the teaching team at IDOU, where actually, against a lot of business advice, we shifted the calendar this year to create a week of rest in between each of our courses for our course team. When does that ever happen in business, right? But we recognized that we needed to show up better for each other. Oh. And so there's so many more. I could probably talk for another 3 hours about all the examples of matriarchy in nature. Again, just to echo what you said, it's all around us. And so there are great resources like asknature.org that you can explore so many more. The last thing that I want to say before I'm looking over at you, Michelle, because I know there's so much I want to ask you about cycles and time when it comes to matriarchy, but I want to remind us of two natural events that just happened and are about to happen. So menstruating people and their bodies have an internal clock. We know this, those who believe know this, which is different from men's clocks, which happen in a 24-hour cycle. Ours mirror more the moon's cycle of about a 28-day clock of times of rest, times of activity. And yesterday we had a new moon. So maybe not the right energy that I would have preferred to have a very extroverted event that might have maybe more aligned with a full moon moment. But we also are 1 week away from the spring equinox. Both new moons and equinoxes are a really great time for planting seeds, setting intentions. And so think about the energy that's around us as we are in an experience like South by, and how we might take advantage of that as individuals, and how we think about what we want to do coming out of this event. Michelle, I know you've done so much work around cycles and time and rest, and I'm really curious what you might share about how we can take this forward.
So it's interesting, everyone, because we also had another really big time event yesterday. Anyone? Daylight savings. And I'm going to come back to daylight savings because daylight savings is a human-made effort to control time and make time more predictable. So I'm going to focus now, when I think about matriarch-centered design, I think about the juxtaposition between a predominantly linear, productivity-focused, output-oriented world that we live in, with a cyclical, iterative, unpredictable, generative process, and how the latter feels more like how we experience nature. And I'm an innovation strategist, I'm a design thinker, and I have spent years working in the tension of trying to empower a cyclical process in a world that favors and prefers productivity, linear time, and output. And what I want us to really connect with right now, after we've heard about these examples from nature, is cyclical time is not outside of us. It is within our own design. Cyclical time is within our own design as human beings. And so we don't just watch the seasons change. We don't just watch the sun rise and set, the moon wax and wane. Our digestion rises and falls. Our hormones cycle on a 24-hour rhythm. Cyclical time is in our design. And what's happened over the years is we have chipped and chipped and chipped away at cyclical time, because cyclical time is marked by dynamic periods of activity and equally inherently immutable periods of rest. And we just keep chipping away at that rest. We try to take time and make it more linear, more predictable. So let's dive into the time. Eleanor's going to move my slides here. So before there were 12 months in a year, there were 13 months in a year. And we marked those 13 months by the lunar cycles, which meant that every year we ended our year on a different date. It was unpredictable. We didn't know exactly when it was going to end because it was marked by the 28-day lunar cycles. And so in 1582, Pope Gregory VIII instituted what we now know as the Gregorian calendar. And what the Gregorian calendar does is it makes sure that we start and end our year on the exact same date every year. So interestingly, we should be starting our New Year's in the spring, the seasons of renewal and rebirth and fertility. Instead, we start our new year in the middle of winter, because that is a human-made construct, controlled time. Interestingly as well, many of you may have heard of the Ashango bone. It was found in 1957 in the Congo. It is carbon dated to 22,000 to 28,000 years old, and it is famous for the 28 linear etchings in the bone, which researchers think were our first human efforts to track time. But more interestingly, researchers think it was a woman who was tracking her cycles with the moon, which means that women may have been the first predictors of basic periodic time. Now, I mentioned daylight savings. Daylight savings is credited to a number of different individuals around the world, but what's important about daylight savings is that almost all of the narratives are around increasing productivity. They're almost all about using that excess daylight to make us more productive. And my last thought here around time that I want to share is in 2021, researchers at the University of Toronto, David Sampson, used predictive analysis in primates and Homo sapiens to try to gauge how much sleep Homo sapiens need in their natural environment. So not what our society looks like today, but in our natural environment. 11 hours of sleep, which means
Leaders been getting 11 hours.
Anyone 11 hours last night?
Anybody? One person.
So 11 hours of sleep, almost exactly in balance with that dynamic period of activity. We're not sleeping 11 hours anymore. Let's talk about what's happening with time in the workplace. In 1926, the Ford Motor Company successfully advocated for an 8-hour workday. The 8-hour workday is the maximum amount of physical labor you can extract from a human body without diminishing returns. That is why we work 8 hours a day. It has no basis in cognitive neuroscience, and we have adopted that practice around the world, and we are paying the price for that. In the last 100 years, we saw the rise of communism, which capitalism responded in turn by working longer hours, because communism was associated with shorter hours because it was attached to daylight. Then in the 90s, we had kind of a double whammy of the rise of the Wall Street never sleeps mentality at the same time as we were experiencing unprecedented globalization with the rise of the internet. You literally could work 24 hours a day, chipping away at the cyclical time, chipping away at the rest. And now we have arrived at a completely untenable workplace. We're seeing the symptoms of burnout everywhere. COVID really served to bring it to the surface, but I think that rupture would have happened no matter what. And we know that women are disproportionately affected by the burnout. Future Forum did a study in 2023, 10,000 desk-based workers, and women report higher levels of burnout than men. And so bringing this completely now back to what's happening with design and neuroscience.
Actually, Michelle, would you mind if I just jump in really quick?
Yes.
I just want to call out a really important point that you made in terms of the cycles of rest and our professional settings, and how that doesn't just happen at work. Even in our personal lives, like the whole concept of FOMO, fear of missing out. The fact, are you putting it on the gram? Are you putting it on Snap? Are you putting it on LinkedIn? We're constantly in that period of productivity. I'm always having to produce, even when I'm home. Oh, I have to do self-care. I have to put a mask. I have to do I have to do. So that just is something that has really struck with me, that I don't just try to do value at work and get rid of my cycles of rest, but even when I'm not at work, I have such difficulty switching off.
Yeah. Was anybody else in the Esther and Brene Brown session? I feel like we really touched on a lot of that as well, and the beyond human scale idea. Like, you just cannot keep up. So bringing this in cyclical time, bringing it all back around to design. So as designers, here's why that cyclical rest is important. In the last 20 years, fMRI technology has shown that when your brain is at rest, either your mind is wandering or you're sleeping, your brain isn't idle. That was the original hypothesis, that you were just kind of like on low power mode. That's not true. When your brain is at rest, the default mode network literally turns on, it becomes active. And what the default mode network is doing is it's trying to help you solve problems. It is trying to connect memories, experiences, data that you absorbed when you were in cerebral mode, and it's trying to help you solve problems you've been ruminating on. It's why you get your best ideas in the shower, and when you're walking your dog, and when you're doing dishes. It's because your mind is wandering, default mode network is on, and it's moving information around your brain, trying to help you solve creative problems. As designers, this period of rest is critical for us, and trying to intentionally bring it back into our workplace is absolutely paramount. And particularly as a social innovation strategist, I have to ask myself, how many problems could we have solved in the world if we were resting more? How much progress could we have made towards social impact if we were not so bought into the product-driven output? So Natalie, is there hope for us? Let's bring it back to the tangible and the concrete in the workplace. I'll conclude by sharing one last story. This past fall, a client signed on a design thinking contract with us, and she was like, Michelle, I want you to do HCD for me without doing HCD for me on this contract. And what she meant was, HCD being human-centered design, what she meant was, I want the benefits and the outcomes of a design thinking process, because I know it works, but I don't want to be involved in it. I don't want you to include me. I don't want you to be collaborative. Like, can you please just go off and do it and then report back with the most amazing results? And I was like, face palm, like, what do I do? Natalie, you got a new book out, the Experimentation Field Book. What do you say to a client like that, and how can we kind of bring practices into our space to bring in those matriarchal values?
Yeah, y'all, I mean, if Michelle gave the example for herself, but you've all probably gotten really ridiculous asks, I'm guessing in the last week or two, from a customer, from a boss, whoever, right? Of like, and probably most of you are doing the work of like 4 people. I mean, that's just the state of affairs these days. Too, and it's daunting, right? So what are we gonna do about it? We're gonna borrow cycles, and we're gonna borrow iteration and take baby steps toward it. I know when I see problems like this or hear some, especially data and research that are showing, I'm like, let's do this, right? And we will, but also I think that's the system we're in now is like, there's not you don't take baby steps. All we're trying to do today is to say, how might we take a small step? Just get your knee up on that first little ledge, right? And we're gonna iterate and cycle and then create a better, more matriarchal design system as we go. And the power is with each of us in the small little micro moments that we have to work with too. But that's why I wrote the book about experimentation, is that experimentation is small little baby steps over and over again where you build up those learning loops and you iterate and move towards better as a group of people, as a collective too. And so that's where we're gonna kind of invite y'all to say, and you're probably thinking, wow, this lady's sitting up here, we only been talking for 30 minutes or 40 minutes and now we're jumping into like, we're doing it. Okay, great. But you can, and I think part of that is taking baby steps and kind of trying to shed the whole like, doing something or taking action means go big or home, like only bring your A game, iterating and learning and small growth is not as appreciated, right? But we can do it and show big steps, yeah.
Can I add something there, Natalie? That's actually one of my favorite things about when we worked together. I remember the first time Natalie and I worked together, we were working on a design sprint, and she was like, give me your best C+ work. When have you ever heard a client ask for your best C+ work? But that was the most perfect place to begin, right? Because then you have something you can iterate with. A lot of times we wait until the last minute because we are trying to make it perfect. We are afraid of any type of criticism, right? But even the way we designed this panel, we've been having conversations for months about what does this look like and what might we bring to it. And I just wanted to highlight that because I think that those baby steps and over time is so important.
Yeah, it's hard to unlearn not getting an A, right? And that's what we're taught. And I think a lot of what we're talking about is behavior change and practicing matriarchal values in our day-to-day, in our personal relationships, in a meeting at work, with our boss, with our teams, right? And this is just about taking small shifts to the right. Like we're generally moving, you have to know where you're moving from and you have to know where you're moving to. But this is a spectrum. You don't have to leap, there's no heroics, no theatrics, no one cares. If you're gonna get there in a hot second, just take your time, right, and iterate towards it. So as you go through it, we're really trying to shift from I have the answer to we can figure it out together. I mean, pitch competition, and I'll use this analogy as, it's a very kind of like, it's me, right? I came up with this answer and I'm here to pitch, being right and my idea, right? And that's good, but we're trying to move towards more of a co-creation, right? You're co-creating that solution with your customer, with the people that you're serving, and you're waking up and thinking about every day too. And really kind of moving more towards less falling in love with your idea, which is very hard to do, particularly as an entrepreneur, and more falling in love with, am I creating what I want, the intention that I hope this product or service or meeting or relationship I want it to have too, right? And this iterating from being right to iterating to better, right? You mentioned, Cate, like the bloom, rest, grow, bloom, harvest. We can't be bloom, bloom, blooming. Like there's no way, right? But that is often what is expected of us. And this being right is like every day you're firing up and you're blooming, blooming, blooming. It's literally physically not possible, as nature kind of shows us too. Falling in love with the problem instead of the solution. I know if y'all are a designer, that's one that you know well. But as the solution gets you're inching towards it, you start to fall in love with it, right? It's harder to kind of back up and remember why you're here and what the problem is that you're solving. And then the last one's very matriarchal, right? Serving us instead of serving me. And that's really saying, like, if you design for those margins, right, the tide will lift all boats, right? Because you'll get people being like, if you're only serving one person or this person, you serve the collective and you serve all the members of it in the different groups, it will rise up, as we're moving. So I'm more yeah. So lastly, I love a good process, y'all, and that might sound boring, but I think it's really democratizing and demystifying. This is not magic. You can do this today, and I like a good, start here, 1, 2, 3, right? Start with observe. Just do a little audit of, people in your lives, spaces that you're in, community, it could be a civic group, it can be your church or synagogue, wherever, wherever you are in community, look for examples of where there is matriarchy or not, right? That you're seeing some of those, you're not seeing some of these values in place, or you are, or you're more on the from than the to side, right? Just take stock, just sit, don't judge, just sit with it too. And then you're moving into co-creation. Go, grab a friend, grab a coworker, grab a tree, like go for a walk in the woods, talk to these different entities, right? And say, what's possible here, right? Like what could be different? And then experiment, right? This is why I wrote this book. Baby steps, right? Do not feel like you have to like quit your job and go and do, just take a small step, try it on for a week, right? C+ work. Just start with that baby. So get your knee up on that ledge like a little baby, right? And give it a shot. So this could be something like, hey, there's a female leader in another group in my org that really leaves her ego out of stuff. This is you observing, right? She's not at all concerned about being right or looking good in front of everybody. And then you notice and observe how her team responds to that. Probably pretty awesome, right? And then you just go check yourself maybe with a friend and say, you know what, I'm gonna try that on something. I'm working, experiment on a design brief for this new project. And you know what, normally I do it myself. I try and produce A+ work, right? I spend way too long, think about it way too much. And instead I'm gonna hand it off, I'm gonna hand a piece of it to my coworker who might be more junior than me, but I'm gonna let them have a go at it and give it a shot. You're right, inclusivity, you're supporting someone else's growth too, and then you take it and you can create it together. But this is something that you could do this week, right? So I encourage you to kind of think about something, maybe even here at the conference, and do this kind of quick learning loop on a week or so too. But that's just why I love experimenting. It democratizes this process of I have to be right or I have to get A+ work. You just iterate to better too. And Saraounia is going to show us that you don't have to do this alone, right? We're all in community together with this.
All right, everybody. In the spirit of experimentation, as Nat has just brought us to, and also the theme of South by Southwest 2024, thinking about the future. We talked about earlier in terms of how we can not only inherit and create a world where masculinity was synonymous with positivity, with inclusion, how can we create the world that we've been talking about as designers in this room and as the accomplices of designers? And so I would like to ask folks to stand when I say the statement, if it connects with them, if this is their one thing or something that they are going to do to be our accomplices after this session in terms of building a world that is more matriarch-centered. And again, the idea of matriarch-centered isn't men are banished or men are on the bottom. This is the idea of it's a circle, it's a cycle. We're all in this together. And so, if you will create cycles of rest, kindly join me and stay standing or raise your hand. If you will commit to partnering with nature. Alrighty. If you will champion matriarchs, those that you know and those that may be emergent. And finally, if you're going to seek out examples of matriarch-centered design in your world, in your environment, can I get a whoop whoop? Woo-hoo! Thank you, everyone.
We wanted to save some time for Q&A, so we're going to skip this story unless folks don't have questions, and I want to hop it over to Michelle.
So it's been a journey. I'm glad you're all still with us. It was a lot of information. And we know that all of you have your own experiences to bring to the table as well. So rather than run this as a traditional Q&A, we'd like to invite this as a space for sharing. So if you'd like to approach the mic, and you're welcome to ask a question, but if you have an insight or a reflection, like it was said earlier, these are our interpretations of matriarch-centered design. We're not sure there's a right or wrong answer yet. We're not sure there's anything definitive or institutional or established here. So please do also feel free to share ideas or insights if you'd like to approach the mic. And if that sounds like not your cup of tea and super uncomfortable, please also feel free to use our Mentimeter. So if you click the QR code on the Mentimeter, it will take you to a screen where you can also input questions, thoughts, or ideas. And then we're also going to put up at the end our social media, and if you'd like to follow us, we plan on continuing the conversation about Matriarch-Centered Design after South by Southwest on our LinkedIn and social media via vlogs and conversations, etc. So feel free to use both mechanisms. We invite you to the mic, or feel free to use the Mentimeter if that is more comfortable. Yes, please.
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel. I did a wild thing last year in terms of rest and prioritizing rest. One of my priorities for the year was to do less and be more intentional. And what that looked like as a practice was Monday to Friday, sitting down Monday, looking at my calendar for the week, and my aim was to have 2 things or less every day that would take more than 20 minutes. And that included anything that was not leisure. So on Thursdays, I have my teletherapy. It's an hour long. That's one of my things on Thursday, right? And it wasn't possible to do every single day. And I know if you work in workplaces, you're often given a default 1-hour meeting or a 30-minute meeting. But so many things can be done in 20 minutes or less. Maybe they expand to a little bit more time, but it made a huge, huge difference in my year.
Thank you, Rachel. And I also want to add, if you're familiar with the Pomodoro technique, yeah, the Pomodoro technique helps you time box 20 or 25 minutes marked with rest. There are many tools online, so if you're interested in the Pomodoro technique. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Maggie. I co-run sort of a non-traditional law firm that's based here in Austin. Virtual, we try to recruit sort of diverse attorneys and give people flexible work schedules and that kind of thing. One of the things that we're trying to do right now is sort of rebuild, because I think, how do I put this? Like a lot of the times we talk about like, okay, we have to make the workplace more inclusive, but I feel like we're starting with a particular blueprint and then tweaking it, as opposed to like, okay, if we stepped back and we had never even seen an office before, like how would we actually structure work? And so we're trying to figure out how to take concrete steps to actually engage in that process. And right now where we're at is like, okay, the attorneys are all going to meet and sort of start talking about this. But we feel very like our first thought was actually like, let's develop some policies and procedures. And I was like, I don't know. It feels like sort of more of the same, doesn't it? So I don't really have like a particular ask or question, but I don't know if other people have thoughts or insights on like what a good first step would be.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Maggie. Thank you for being vulnerable with the changes you're trying to make. Panel, would you offer any advice to Maggie? Saraounia?
I'd like to offer a thought. I think one of the easiest ways, or I don't know if it's easy, but one way in which we can start thinking about more intentional inclusion is thinking about the impact that we're trying to achieve. And if we start our theory of change from what is the impact we're trying to achieve, and then figuring out, is the way that we're currently comprised or configured, does it help us to achieve that impact? If we are trying to work with certain kinds of groups, or we are trying to engage certain kind of sectors and create that impact, do the folks that we have in the room lead us there? Do they lead us? They might lead us there, and we might not know it because we only know the version of them that they've brought to the office. That's why the concept of your authentic self and psychological safety within workplaces may show that you have people that have super skills in being able to be those bridges, to be able to be those interlocutors for inclusion, that just given the platform, given the stage, they will be able to shine through and co-create with you what steps you need to take to be able to deliver that impact. Thanks.
Maggie, I will also offer from a facilitation standpoint, I love a good future state exercise. Map what the future looks like, sees like, feels like, embody yourself in it, and then work backwards into the map of how you get there. Thank you, Maggie. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Yaya. I really enjoyed today's session. I think there's so many areas that can be improved and to take a baby step forward. There's one area I'm really curious about your opinion. I'm a mom of a young toddler. And I think I'm asking on behalf of all the mom of young children, so right now being a work mom, especially a work mom in a leadership position, is extremely hard. And how we navigate through that while still keeping loving for everyone, but in the fact ourselves are burnout in any single ways. So I wonder what's your opinion on how we navigate through?
Thank you so much, Naya, and congratulations. And Natalie, I'm gonna kind of this to you.
Children are really hard, and they're a lot of work. And I think experimentation, at least for me, was a big factor in that, particularly as being CEO of a firm while I had at the time a 2 and a 4-year-old, and it's exhausting. And I think the experimentation is really like you don't always have the luxury of a calendar that's like you can only work this time, and it's when you're most productive. Like that's out the window. But there are really small ways that you can. I think to me, experimentation was really what I caught on because the babies were constantly changing too. My partner's work was constantly changing, and so it became like let's just try this new thing for a week, this new pattern of behavior, and let's see how it goes. That was really helpful for us, rather than just like sitting in the oh, this is really hard, of finding small ways, and then being in community with other women going through the same thing was insanely important, because we would basically kind of co-create different things. Oh, you're trying that, I'm trying this, type of thing. We could talk over a drink. You're here, that's great.
I also just want to add that kids are awesome because they're so honest. When kids are mad, they're mad. When kids are tired, they're tired. When they're hungry. Similar to nature's never going to lie to you, kids are also never going to lie to you, right? And so they're actually like the perfect design partners because they will always give you the best radical feedback.
So I think I'm being signaled that we are at time. So if you're still in line, I invite you to come up. We're gonna stay a little bit longer. I would like to take a moment to thank our ASL interpretation, if you could give them a round of applause. And then I also would really love to thank Eleanor Felton, a member of my team. She designed the beautiful logo as well as the PowerPoint deck, and we would not be here without her. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful conference, and please feel free to come up and say hello.